It's a very, very infectious and enthusiastic crowd tonight. So I'm Stan Grant. We're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight. And joining me on the panel, CSIRO Chief Executive Larry Marshall, Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy Jenny McAllister, writer and disability advocate Hannah Diviney, who's been making headlines around the world this week after her big win over Beyonce. We're going to come to you on that very, very soon. The Director of the Indigenous Forum at the Centre for Independent Studies, Warren Mundine, and South Australian Greens Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. Please make them welcome.
Climate report outlines CSIRO's views of expected megatrends of the future. I've read the report, and my analysis is that it seems to be a result of brainstorming of options rather than being substantiated by serious, substantial science. Why am I wrong? The CSIRO, can you actually predict the future? Or are the recommendations of the report really based upon an exercise of the precautionary principle?
Larry.
Thank you. So we dream of science being able to predict the future, and we can certainly model it, and we can model different options. And it turns out that often we come very close to getting it right, but you absolutely cannot be certain of the future. But I'll just give you one example. In 2016, we hypothesised the chance of a disease we call Disease X. So we made a lot of changes to CSIRO, including changing the role of our biosecurity lab, the only one of its kind in either the southern or the eastern hemispheres, and made it the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness. And so we were ready on the front foot when Disease X turned out to be COVID-19. So that's an example of why using science to model the future is so important. But can we get it 100% right? No. But you know what? If we get it wrong and we've prepared for it, we're prepared for the next thing. But if we don't do it, then that's really bad.
Larry, so many of the mega trends that you've looked at sort of overlap in a lot of ways. There's climate change, leaner, cleaner and greener, the health imperative, geopolitical shifts and so on. What is the big challenge, do you think, that connects all of these dots?
Yeah, the big one is for Australia is our innovation dilemma. So we have a history of incredible ingenuity. We invented the solar design that's actually being used around the world to make solar panels. We invented Wi-Fi, which has been commercialised extensively around the world. But we don't back ourselves. We're sort of afraid to believe in ourselves. It's almost like the actors and actresses that need to go overseas and become famous before we recognise them here. But that's changing, and this is what really gives me hope. So Australian science created a solution to reduce 15% of the entire world's emissions, those that come from cattle. And this is it, it's called Future Feed. Now that's a gift that Australia has invented and created for the world to reduce emissions. But this time, Australian companies like Woolworths, universities like JCU and organisations like GRDC teamed up with CSIRO to make the science real and turn it into a series of Australian companies that employ our children for the future, to grow jobs and use innovation of science to solve a major problem. We need to do more of this, but for some reason we're a bit afraid to.
Peter, that's more than the precautionary principle, isn't it? That's trying to get on the front foot. Are you more satisfied or reassured after that answer?
Look, it's a very complex question. The precautionary principles is sensibly applied if you're trying to prepare yourself, as Larry has said. But as he said too, you can often be wrong. And the consequences of being wrong are also very serious. I actually have worked in agriculture for years, so I'm well familiar with the farting of cattle and sheep. And that's not an easy problem to solve, because you can come up with all these miraculous cures, if you like, but when it comes to actually applying them, and I've seen this happen time and time again in agriculture, they're very difficult to actually implement.
Yeah. I'll go to Jenny on this too. Just picking up on that point, you can prepare, Jenny, but it is difficult to meet all eventualities. And coming into power at this moment when we have war in Ukraine, we've got potential economic recession or even worse facing us around the world, and of course there is so much uncertainty around climate and COVID as well. How do you prepare yourself for this?
What I like about Peter's question is he's really thinking about not just the science, but what do we do about it? And what I would observe about the report, which I'm actually a big fan of, is that it actually integrates decisions that humans are making with scientific analysis about the options and technologies and pathways available to us. Because the truth is, we're not really just trying to predict the future. The report asks us to think about how we will shape it. So, Stan, yes, as the report points out, significant geopolitical challenges, very significant resource constraints, including our carbon budget, big changes going on in terms of stresses to our health system. What I think they require is quite a sophisticated politics. And it's one of the things that I'm really interested in, is how do you get politics to engage with these hard and difficult questions. The truth is that almost nothing in the report produced by CSIRO can be reduced to a 3-word slogan. That's actually not an option for us in dealing with these big, complex megatrends.
We've got agreement already. Go bring Sarah Hanson-Young in here, because it is interesting, Sarah, that we can prepare ourselves, but we live in a world of unpredictability, and it's a divided and very dangerous world. On the one hand, Larry talks about the need for climate change policies and a leaner, cleaner and greener future. We also face the prospect of potentially catastrophic war in countries spending more on their military right now, don't we? That's getting those priorities right in a world that is so complicated, where we have to rely on each other, and a world that is on the verge potentially of conflict makes it so much more difficult.
Absolutely, and I think Jenny's right when she says these issues are complex and politics has to step up as political leaders, as leaders in the community, as those of us concerned about these issues. We have to be prepared to engage properly, listen to the science, listen to the warnings that are coming forward, and look at the toolbox that we have as to how we deal with it. I think one of the key issues that overreaches all of these things is that there has been such a lack of trust and belief in the institutions that have traditionally managed these crises for us. And I think politicians have a lot of responsibility to take for that. I think what we need to be doing is increasing the level of positive engagement. Ideas that are put on the table, just because it might not be your idea doesn't make it a bad one. Opposition for opposition's sake is not going to help us through these issues. So we've got to learn to work together. We're not always going to agree, but one of the key things about having a genuine discussion with transparency, with the ability to challenge ideas, is often you'll get better solutions anyway, because no one has the solutions to everything.
Opposition for opposition. Well, I might have to hold you to that. We may be getting some discussions a little later where we may see some opposition for opposition's sake. But Hannah,
I hope not. I genuinely hope not. Yeah. I think people need to put that aside and work out how we work together better.
Hannah, what does the future look like from your perspective?
Well, after reading the CSIRO report and talking to my friends and basically seeing the reactions of everyone I follow on social media who's young and very worried about our future, it looks pretty damn terrifying. Because if we make one wrong move, that's it, game over. And it doesn't, we can talk about all the complex problems in the world, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, none of that matters if we don't actually have a planet to live on. So I feel like that should probably be the first and biggest priority. And obviously, with conflict and everything, there's a lot of nuance to that conversation that's not going to be solved in one day. It's not going to be solved in a year. It's going to take lots of work. But I think part of what has to happen is young people have to feel like they're part of the conversation, because we're the ones that are going to be left with whatever does or doesn't happen now.
Well said.
How do I come up after that one.
Yeah.
Because I'm in that technology stuff, so that's my career, my life for the last 30 years. I believe, and in that report, they actually talk about technology is our friend and how we can move forward on it. I'm also a great believer that, and I've seen it happen, where when the politicians are stuck in the mud and not moving forward, you can actually go around them. And you actually can get things happening.
Hell yeah, you can.
Oh, I've built a career out of it, actually, yeah. And so I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm very optimistic about what we can achieve and what we can do. But we do need the politicians, and I just said get out of the way, because they set the environment. They set what happens in that environment, and so we've got to work with them. We've got to get them to listen. And to me, it's not rocket science. You just look at what's happening, you see what's got to be done, and we've got the technology to do it. We've got the technology today to do it. It just needs the courage of people to get out there and do it.
I don't know how to go from that to Beyonce, but my questions are about Beyonce just released her new album, and there's a song on there that uses an ableist slur. She's since apologised. She's since changed the wording of the song and re-released it. My questions to you, Hannah. Artists like Lizzo and Beyonce, when they do things like this, do you think it's good enough that they just apologise, quickly make a change and re-release that song?
I was waiting for this. They warned me it was coming and I was still waiting. So, look, I really wish, obviously, that they hadn't released the song with the slur in the first place. That would mean I wouldn't have had, and so many other disability advocates wouldn't have had to expend our emotional labour explaining why the slur is not cool and why it should be taken out. And it would probably also mean that my Twitter mentions weren't as much of a dumpster fire as they are right now, but that's okay. Look, I really respect Lizzo and Beyonce for apologising. I think that's a great move because I think we have definitely seen it before when celebrities do that whole, I'm going to double down, that's not what I meant, you just took it the wrong way, blah, 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 blah. And both of these women who, it has to be said, occupy incredible spaces as marginalised people themselves, have shown everyone around the world how to be an effective ally. And that's basically be open to learning, go, okay, cool, I did something wrong, now I'm going to just fix it and we're not going to make a huge fuss about it. I just wish the people who are really passionate about the fact that Beyonce and Lizzo had to change the lyrics in their song would get that message, because I actually debated whether or not to bring this up because I have a lot of people that I care about watching and people who care about me, and they don't quite know the level of trolling I've got this week. But I have had people basically sending me photos of, or like GIFs of people in wheelchairs falling over, people in wheelchairs being pushed off cliffs, all that kind of stuff, which basically is telling me to shut up and go away. But luckily, I'm not very good at listening to that, so.
Good on you. Sorry to hear that. Good on you. Good on you. Hannah, when you hear something like that, and you were very generous and gracious in talking about Beyonce and taking it down, but when you hear something like that, what is the feeling? What is the reaction?
The feeling in the Beyonce case was a lot of confusion and a lot of hurt that I think went deeper than Lizzo, because I couldn't work out how she'd missed the conversation we had 6 weeks ago, because it kind of went around the world. And I wasn't really sure how someone on Beyonce's team missed that memo that if they kept that word in the song, they were going to run into the same problem. I don't know if they thought, like, she's called it out once, she won't dare call it out again. But trust me, I can and I will every time. So I think it's just a lot of frustration, confusion, hurt. That particular word has been used against me before as an insult and is especially being used against me now. It's been used against people I care about, and it presumes like a lack of intelligence or emotional control, which is not at all things that I want associated with me, things I want associated with my disability. They don't reflect on my life at all. And trust me, if people had to actually live with spasticity, I don't think they'd be using that as an insult because it hurts.
Toby, are you particularly a Beyonce fan, or?
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Huge, of course.
Did that change your view of her music when you heard that word? And we don't want to repeat that word because it's completely unnecessary to repeat it. But when you heard that,
yeah, I think the same as Hannah as well. I was confused because we all just saw what happened with Lizzo. And I just thought, there's not a chance that no one in her team, she worked with so many people, and not one person stood up and said, hold up, you don't use that word. It baffles me, and I still love her, but, it does, it takes its toll.
It also goes to representation, doesn't it? Can I bring Jenny and Sarah in here as well? Sarah, you look around at the lack of representation in Parliament, and the Greens are the only person with someone with a visible disability, Jordan Steele-John, in the Parliament, and I think the point was made by you, Hannah, about the minister and who the minister is, and that the minister doesn't actually represent your community.
See, when people have to make decisions about marginalised communities, it's my view that the person who's making the decisions should probably be a part of that marginalised community. Just a hunch that maybe lived experience should count for something. And I think, while obviously there are multiple barriers to people with disabilities' political participation, the fact that there is only one senator in the whole of the history of Australian Parliament who has had a visible disability, and the fact that they then had to make changes to Parliament House that they weren't making before, shows me just how far we have to go. Now, that's not to say that other parliamentarians don't have invisible disabilities or disabilities that they haven't disclosed, but obviously we can only act on what we know, and what we know is Jordan Steele-John is the only disabled parliamentarian. And I think all of that comes down to the fact that, people with disabilities don't see themselves anywhere. There's two narratives you get taught about as a disabled person growing up. One of them is Paralympic excellence. It happens every 4 years. These people pop up and they do a great job. I am as much a fan of Dylan Alcott, Kurt Fernley, all of those guys as anyone else. I think they're incredible. But newsflash, not every disabled person is good at sport. Not every disabled person wants to go to the Paralympics. Not every disabled person could have a hit with Dylan Alcott and come away with a silver medal. The other narrative we get is a narrative of tragedy. How many times have you guys seen a drink driving or a speeding ad where basically the thing they want to show you to deter you from doing that is a person in a wheelchair who thinks their life is over?
Wow. Hannah, I think you've just created a whole lot of thought right now across the country. I really do. And that is the kind of leadership that we need to hear from people who have lived experience. It's one of the reasons why I think, and I know Senator Steele-John is pushing for this quite hard. There's a couple of vacancies at the moment in relation to the NDIS, the chairperson and the CEO. Those positions should be being actively filled by people with lived experience so that they can show that leadership. And I just want to say one of the best things from my experience and my learning in relation to people's watching vicariously through the lived experience is being there with Jordan in the parliament and having to see how he still has to navigate just physically the place, let alone emotionally and socially when people, simple things like when we have to stand to speak, he can't get the president's attention. We're often having to kind of wave and say, well, Jordan has something to say. Across the board, it's every day there is another challenge. And having somebody with lived experience right there next to you is a very good way of teaching the rest of us.
Jenny?
I wanted to say thanks for your intervention now and over the last couple of weeks, because that is really powerful.
Yes,
and
I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, it means a lot. I think we are going through a really interesting, big public discussion, and it's been important in the parliament, but also, of course, it's been important in the community. A big discussion about who is represented and how, and who occupies authority and who gets to speak. It's been one of the most interesting and transformative conversations that I've witnessed in an adult life, where I have been quite interested in politics since, leaving school. The lived experience of a whole range of people who have not previously been represented is immensely important. I know Labor actually went to the election with a range of things that we hoped to do in relation to the NDIS. One of them was to return lived experience to the centre of its administration, in board, in senior executive positions. And you're right that there are vacancies there at the moment, and the Minister, Bill Shorten, is going through a selection process, but he's been very clear that he wants to see lived experience reflected more strongly.
That will be reflected? There is a likelihood, do you think, that someone will be appointed to those positions with lived experience?
He's going through a proper process of selection, but he's made it very clear that lived experience matters, and there's a range of opportunities to introduce it into the administration of the NDIS, and I know that the Minister is looking at those. More particularly, though, the whole system needs to be more responsive to the people who are using it.
Yes, please.
It was established to offer choice and control, and over recent years, those features of the system have been eroded.
You've led us through our transcript. Thank you.
My apologies.
Hannah, thank you so much for what you said there as well.
You say artificial intelligence will literally consume many of the jobs that we know today. Which industries should young people seek for job opportunity, and which industries do you predict will prosper and plummet first?
So it's true that a number of groups, including us, have tried to figure out which jobs will go. And I think what we realised is the key is in the seventh megatrend, which is unlocking the human dimension. So in CSIRO, like most places, our people had a bit of a fear of artificial intelligence. Will it replace my job? Will I lose my job? What we learnt is so even scientists have this fear. So what we learnt is that innovation is driven by collaboration. And when you collaborate with machine intelligence, you get something much better than either one would have done alone. That human power of creativity, that human power of diversity of experience really unleashes the full potential of AI to solve the problems that we want to solve. The thing about AI, though, it's like a child. It only knows what we teach it. So if we're not careful, we'll teach it all of our bad habits. And that's why the government tasked CSIRO to come up with an ethics framework, a bit of a roadmap for AI, and now to create a national AI network, so we can bring all of that brainpower together responsibly, so that when Australia deploys AI, it's done ethically, responsibly, it can be interrogated, and the public can actually trust it rather than just letting it run willy-nilly.
But we're talking not just about the ethics of it. You were speaking specifically about jobs as well, Dominic, weren't you? And when you look at it, Larry, so many jobs are going to disappear. People who drive vehicles, for instance. It's often the poorer part of communities, people who are not earning as much, who are going to be most affected? I know you've talked about the need to focus on the jobs of tomorrow, not the jobs you're losing. But if you're losing a job, what do you say to those people?
Oh, look, it is awful when anyone loses a job. But again, what we found in CSIRO, so we automated a number of processes that were previously done by technicians, so fairly simple processes. But those people didn't go. What we found was once we freed them from literally pipetting tubes, so we started doing that using automation, once we freed them from that labour, it gave them time to actually work on the insights from all of that data collection, to actually work with the data. So similarly on properties, as you automate things, people don't have to do them anymore. It's a choice of every business owner. You can actually move those people to do higher value tasks, and you will get more from having them involved than you will ever get just letting the machines do it for you. Even Toyota discovered this.
You feeling optimistic about those jobs, Dominic?
Yeah, I just, do you think that'll work for all jobs though? Like you're saying, we can navigate, once AI comes in and starts, getting involved in people's work, we can transition and find them new jobs in that same sector. Well, but is that going to work for everyone?
It obviously depends very specifically, but it's hard to find a role where the human's lived experience, to your point actually, lived experience, doesn't make the artificial intelligence smarter, because AI is not very smart. It's only as smart as we teach it to be.
So it's joint. It's a
collaborative intelligence.
Well,
that's the key.
Has anyone actually looked past the 10-year deadline to when my generation is in positions of power? With your current plan, will my generation even reach 50? Younger generations don't trust the government. We just think it's a massive joke. So why should we put our little remaining faith into something that may not even help us in the long term? What then? Why should we trust it or you?
Jenny? Oh, yes.
Can I just ask how old you are, Hannah?
13.
Okay.
You're going to take over and you're 23. Oh, my God.
Wow.
We may be in better hands, Warren.
You go, sister.
Jenny?
Yeah.
Hannah, that is such an important question, and it's possibly the question. Politics has to respond to the things that young people are asking it to do. And over the last couple of years, young people have been out on the street making it really clear from a very young age that they've been dissatisfied at the adequacy of the government's response, the previous government's response on climate. One of the things that I think about the reforms that went through the Parliament this week, that they're actually a democratic reform as well as an economic and an environmental one, because the Parliament must show people, particularly young people, that it's going to respond to the things that are expressed as a priority.
Hannah, is it just one party or another? Is it just politics in general?
Politics in general is biased. They're trying too hard to please themselves or please everyone, and in the end, often it just leaves us wanting. And you're saying, hey, maybe that was the last party. How do we know this one will be any different? Will there be any form of change?
Well, they've got 3 years to prove it, and then you'll get a chance to vote, not in the next election, but in the one after that. Larry, what can you offer as a scientist looking to the future, looking at your megatrends, for some optimism for Hannah looking to the future?
So Hannah, what do you want to do when you leave school, or what is it?
I want to go into zoology, but honestly, at the rate we're going, might not be any animals left to study.
So you want to do science?
Yes.
Which is fantastic, because scientists will invent the solutions to these problems that we're facing.
No biases there. No biases there.
I know the future looks bleak. I know that, but look at what we've just done as a nation. We were able to not just get vaccines made overseas accelerated into testing in under a year, and Australia had a huge role in that at the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness, but we're also able to manufacture 50 million doses.
Turns out when we really care about something, we can do it pretty quick, huh?
Exactly,
Yeah.
when we collaborate. So Hannah, So Hannah, when we collaborate, we can do seemingly impossible things, like print solar panels in Australia.
Yep, I can help.
Almost like paper.
Would you like that?
We can make these solutions.
Yes.
And why is this so important? Because there are thousands of people employed in industries that will go away, in the fossil industries. But those people can be retrained to manufacture solutions like this, not just for our energy future, but for the whole world. And if you're going to study science, I want to talk to you afterwards because we need you.
We can keep that conversation. Hannah.
Although we could get Hannah into politics, that seems like maybe her other option.
I'm not selling my soul yet.
I hope that does give you some hope. Thank you so much for that, Hannah. That's all we have time for. It's gone so quickly. Fantastic questions tonight. A great conversation. Please thank our panel, Larry Marshall, Jenny McAllister, Hannah Diviney, Warren Mundine and Sarah Hanson-Young. Please thank them. The great thing about Q&A is that it starts with the cue, it starts with the questions. So thank you for your questions and thanks for the input as well beyond the questions tonight and sharing those stories with us. Thank you at home as well for watching and joining in the conversation. Next week we're back in Melbourne and for a look at increasing global economic uncertainty and growing tensions between China and the US, and hopefully we can navigate our way through that to give you something to look forward to as well. You can join me on Monday for China Tonight. Until then, have a good night.